The idea of a Bioblitz is that it's basically what you find in whatever time period you're given, but we decided on a 24-hour period. That this is indeed one of the most special landscapes in the northeastern United States. It's where the prairie elements come together from the boreal and the temperate forest regions. There just aren't many places like this.
The Lucky Star Ranch stretches over 2,000 acres in picturesque northern New York. It's a gem for property owners Jody and Doreen Garrett. For Jody, the ranch is more than just a summer spot and fishing area. It brings with it family roots.
This is where I spent all my summers as a kid, with my grandfather. I fished here every day with him. This is where I harvested my first ducks, my first geese. I hunted deer here with him. So for us, when we got this property, it was like, coming back to something that had a lot of history with me. I also went to the University of Idaho for wildlife management. So after all those years, now we actually get to put those management principles in place, which is a huge reward.
2,000 acres of pristine northern New York, and we have a 100-acre lake. We do have white-tailed deer on the property, around 300 or 400.
The lakes were stocked by my grandfather, actually, who was a commercial fisherman in the 40s for the original owner, who was J.C. George. He was a heavy equipment operator and seller of that stuff. He would bring his clients up here and kind of wine and dine them, and they'd shoot some pheasants, and he'd package them up. He'd take his orders for equipment and then send them on down the road.
They've always appreciated the landscape. They've been accustomed to this landscape. They grew up in this landscape, and so they knew it was beautiful. They knew it was special. I think that despite how much time they've spent up there, I think that they understand more than ever before that this is indeed one of the most special landscapes in the northeastern United States.
Which makes such a place ideal for a 24-hour Bioblitz. Bugs, plants, four-legged creatures and two-legged creatures, mosses, amphibians, and fish. That's what the students will be tracking. And there's no telling how many different species and ecosystems reside on the vast acreage of the Lucky Star Ranch. But with the help of almost 100 students, a good idea can certainly be established. Despite the cold rain, they work to track and record specific forms of life throughout the morning and afternoon.
We're looking for snakes at the Lucky Star Ranch, so we're going to different parts such as the woods, looking for garter snakes, New York water snakes along the edge of the lake here, and other things that we can find in the forest.
If those charged with counting mammals have no luck actually spotting them, they will instead look for tracks, which are an easy find along the muddy banks on a rainy day. Some species are harmless, slow-moving, and easy to find. Others are more territorial, despite how graceful they appear. On the opposite side of the lake where the swans reside, a student group inventories several different species of fish. This pole device is used to harmlessly still the fish so they can be captured and counted. Not far from the pond, Professor Neil Ringler collects various bugs and other species for study.
We're looking at some very large ponds, they call them lakes, and built right after Second World War. And we're out here surveying everything that moves, and plants, animals, fungi, fish. Our crew right now is looking both at fish on this outlet of the lake, and also on the invertebrates such as dragonflies and mayflies and those. And so far we find a fair diversity. We have teams from the Cranberry Lake Biology Station, from Syracuse proper, graduate students, professors, lots of professors. So we should have a pretty good idea of the kind of diversity.
Hundreds of acres away on the other side of the ranch is a completely different landscape. These are the Alvars, an area of horizontally embedded limestone with very little organic soil on top. The Alvars are unique because they are rare to North America. They were first discovered in Canada in 1985. But even more compelling is the fact that these rocks are approximately 400 million years old. And because they are, they must be studied and treated with care.
Some of the limestone rock that we have here and in the Alvar communities, with those areas, the one thing we're going to do is we're going to keep people away from them. So when we find these spots and we identify where these locations are, what the college students are doing, instead of putting a placard up and saying this is what this is, they're actually taking a GPS coordinates, logging that down, so that we can find it later, or if somebody wants to come study that, we can find it later. But we're trying to stay away from and off of those spots that are identified as some critical areas that we need to protect.
You've got to be in this glaciated landscape, have very little glacial till, left on top of the landscape, so you get these really, really old Ordovician-aged rocks. The rocks in here are over 400 million years old, but they were covered by ice during the Wisconsin stage of the Pleistocene, so the community's only been developing for about 10,000 years.
If you look at the hot spots of where the diversity is known in New York State, and the State Museum did this years ago, they made a map of where are all the rare plants and animals in New York State. And coincidentally, they were found in places like the Syracuse area and Buffalo area and Long Island area, where all the big university centers are. The Alvar landscape, northwest of Watertown, it's been used quite a bit for recreational purposes, but very few people, when they look out and see this barren landscape, really appreciate that that barren landscape allows a lot of plant and animal species to be packed in. And I've always been intrigued by it. In fact, all barren landscapes, whether they're the Alvar landscape or the pine barrens, they tend to have a lot of interesting species because there's not a lot of productive habitat that allows certain species to squeeze out other species.
And then additionally, in the summer, these areas can be very dry, and I know there's some current ESF research looking at fire history in these areas, and often fires would burn off some of those organic soils, setting back succession again to just some of these very, very tolerant mosses and vascular plants. So it's a cool landscape. The limestone influence puts a lot of prairie plants in the landscape that are really unusual for New York State to see these prairie-like communities.
Rare flowers like the Indian paintbrush and the ram's head lady slipper have been found here growing on the Alvar. The ram's head lady slipper hasn't been identified in the region for years. For researchers, the flower is an exciting find.
One in particular that we knew should have been there because it's an orchid that occurs at a Alvar landscape just north of Lucky Star, and then another place just south of Lucky Star, but was never known, although a lot of other rarities were known from Lucky Star Ranch. The ram's head lady slipper had never been seen there, and we were able to find that probably within about an hour and a half.
Meantime, back at the pond, Neil Ringler and his students are making progress in the shallow waters.
So far we found probably 25 kinds of invertebrate animals down here in the creek, and about 7 species of fish: largemouth bass, bullhead, yellow perch. We found nests of sunfish.
All day the rain doesn't let up, but this is a plus for students searching for amphibians.
It draws them out of the ground. Normally they like moist places because that's what keeps them alive. So since everywhere is wet, they're going to be walking around where we can spot them.
After hours of searching and data compilation, the students retreat back to a warm cabin where they can get a closer look at their finds. The importance of body shape and leg count matter when looking at insects, and the height and width of a plant is also vital when recording newfound mosses and plants. All of the collected data will be sent off to New York State, a watch group for tracking and research.
These results feed back to the Heritage Program and other state groups that are really charged with understanding what the abundances of plant and animal species. We need to know, in fact, what we want to do is we want to find so many of these plant and animal species that we decide that, hey, we don't need to list them anymore. That's actually what the goal is. That often isn't the case. We often find out that something is even more rare than we thought, or we find something that for the first time has been seen in New York.
When the day is over, students will mull their findings over as they sleep in their temporary makeshift homes. They'll be back at it again the next day, thus completing the 24-hour Bioblitz.
Well, we came up with a total of almost 900 species of plants, animals, and fungi overall. And that number sounds impressive. That number does not include almost any insects. The only insects that were surveyed were the moths. And the insect diversity is really where most of the diversity is in natural systems. So the numbers are obviously going to be much more than that. The weather was not conducive for some animals on the Wednesday, and then the next day it wasn't conducive for other animals. So overall, I think we had a pretty good snapshot. This is a good time of year. Most plants and animals are out. We did see a fair number of birds, but the best birding is usually earlier in the summer or later in the spring.
It won't be for at least a week that the results of the Blitz come to light, and when they do, researchers are more than pleased.